we perform ritual actions unconsciously every day, all the time, whether we like it or not. And then there's container for ritual, right? Which is like the traditional ritual, which has a mythology tied to it, and um, uh, a community associated with it, and all of that. With ordeal in particular, it's interesting when a ritual ordeal happens emergently, because it's probably more likely that that's going to become trauma, going to become traumatic, because there's no container. Whereas a ritual ordeal that is held by a tradition is like, you come of age. You do the same ritual that your older brother did when he came of age, right? And you might not survive it, especially if, traditionally speaking, especially if you're male, you might not survive it, because, but it is what creates you. You are no longer the child you were. That person is dead. You are now this in the eyes of the community. The community gives you who you are.
The container is now open. It's Christmas time. You can feel it in the air. And on this, the Container episode for Advent season, we bring you none other than Scout Rainer Wiley. You can read her work in her newsletter, which involves like beautiful poetry and mystical thinking, really advanced esoteric concepts, and also stunning visual art. It's a feast, and go to the link in show notes to get yourself some. It's really, I cannot recommend it enough. What Scout does in her work is she blends together a really in-depth and broad understanding of the mythical, mystical, and like magical domains, and she infuses it in this really radical way into a lived experience, sort of ties it all down to real life. A true alchemical marriage of the above and the below, which everyone needs to check out. She's also a ritual artist, a bardic channel, and an oracular guide. And when you hear the interview, you'll see that really the best way to think about Scout is none, like walking the earth, free from any monastic rule, but just as engaged every single moment of every single day in a life spent in direct communion with God. You can just really feel it when you talk to her. Our conversation begins covering the events of Hurricane Helene. Scout is in Asheville, and we actually met her there about a week before the storm hit. But what flowed out of that was just this natural arising conversation about the spirit and a life lived in meaning and in ritual and in deep, deep, deep practice. But before we get to that interview, I want to give a quick shout out to our patrons. They went to patreon.com/thecontainer and they made a commitment to give small monthly donations that keep this show running. What better way to celebrate the Christmas spirit than by signing up and becoming a patron yourself? Not only do these donations give you that warm glow knowing that you support your favorite podcast, but it also helps make all of your dreams come true. And now, on to our interview with Scout Rainer Wiley.
You have just this beautifully fresh perspective. You're just so you. I don't know. My experience of your essence is that you're just so you, and that comes through. And then there's also like this part of who you are that like helps me to kind of understand the cultural like situation there right now. And I don't know, it's heavy, but I I don't know, I feel a lot of gratitude for being able to experience it through your perspective in the work that you've been doing. um because it's unique and because it seems very true, and uh in its, yeah, in its creativity and its like specific voice. I don't know, I just really love your writing
Thank
and
you.
the way that you are or something. Yeah.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Um, like the discomfort I feel in taking credit for anything um creative or wise or whatever it is that people experience me as. Um, I suppose it's just like a part of my devotional nature to like deflect all of it from my own ego or my personality or like my humanity at all. And so I'm just like, people like my writing, and I'm like, well, that's not really me. I don't really know who that is, but I'm gonna keep letting them possess me so that people can continue to find joy and inspiration in what it is that is moving through.
Mm.
And I mean, I don't know, what's the difference between humility and deflection and then, depersonalization versus no self, right? Like these are kind of things that come up for me whenever someone gives me a simple compliment.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
those are all
curious.
really good questions, especially when if you do see yourself as being sort of this vessel or maybe not a vessel as much as like a channel or like that things are coming in and they're passing through you and then into the world, then yeah, I can really I imagine that getting compliments, it's like, okay, well,
Mm.
you know,
What am I supposed to do with that?
yeah, totally.
It's like, should I be saying thank you or you're welcome or both? Yeah. I recently, so I ordered this zine. Jonathan, you may in particular have some interest in, but I think you might both be curious minds that you are have some interest in it. And this Death to the World, Volume 30.
Mm.
And it is a bunch of Orthodox monks started a zine in the 90s.
That's awesome.
It's the most punk thing I've ever seen in my life, but it's also Orthodox at the same time. So, and there's a lot of like poetry in here, and there's an essay by Paul Kingsnorth, and this is this one. But there's an entry in here called "Waging War, Destroying Your Demons," and it talks about the passions, and the whole idea in Orthodoxy is that like oh, excuse me, I guess I need to plug my phone in. Give me 1 second. The passions are just like living for worldly things as opposed to living for the fruits of spiritual practice.
Mm.
um which there are a lot of valid critiques about that, but I found it to be very healing. And it kind of talks about like different passions and the way to free oneself from those passions. And one of them is vainglory, which is related to pride. And it just says everything. The first line says that this passion is characterized by forgetting that God is the source of all that is good and the giver of everything good we have. And we begin to ascribe all our accomplishments to ourselves. And I only just read this last night, and it was really validating because this is just it's not a false humility and a fear of acknowledgement so much as it is like I cannot truthfully say that anything I write, um, it's sort of a process of returning to my source, um, as opposed to some content that I create for people's enjoyment or pleasure, and that's why sometimes I'll write something that people are just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And I'm like, yeah, because it's not about self glorification or gratification. Sometimes I have to write things that I'm like, I don't want this to be seen by anyone ever. See, people are about to get so mad. Like at least I've lost I've lost subscribers and followers and whatnot as much as I have had these compliments of, wow, I love your writing, because it's not really about what people want to hear or even what I want to say. So, I mean, as creators, as people who have a podcast and, are in the relational sphere, I'm sure you have things to say about this. Like in service to authenticity, sometimes we evoke conflict and tension, but
Yeah.
we are trained that these things are not good relationship. Like if we're experiencing conflict or tension, or we're disagreeing, or we're offending each other, or then we're doing relationship bad or something, right? But I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. So
Mm. Yeah, man, a lot to say about that. Whoa. Yeah, the one thing when you were talking about writing, I was thinking about, yeah, there's a way that if you're really in connection with spirit, it's like back in when I was a kid and we would watch TV and we would have to go adjust the antenna and stuff. And it's like when you're really in touch with spirit, people compliment you not for how good the TV show was, but for how good the TV and antenna were, or something. Like how well those were set up. And wow, we really could see this good TV show very clearly. And that's sort of where that's such a different way to think about the writing talent or the writing skill or something. But I love thinking about it that way because it connects to my experience when I'm writing at my best is something like that, where it's more about holding holding myself open to receiving something rather than being brilliant and coming up with something. So I just really resonate with that.
And I think it's interesting that what comes out, and I'm not a writer, but I'm a person who connects to source and things happen and sometimes messes get made. Is that it's not like I'm thinking of like being in deep process with people, and the things that will come out of my mouth that I didn't plan to say, but will end up maybe looking provocative, um, or like cutting or intense. And that was not, that on one end it kind of can, it's like I wasn't trying to provoke anyone.
Mm.
This just came through, and I can be relatively certain that because of understanding that channel and knowing what it's like to be in that flow, that like it's important whatever it was, and that it's going to land how it lands. And just kind of to your point about like, yeah, the messiness of like conflict, it's like, when, at least for me, when I'm in that state, it's, I trust more than anything that what's coming through is has like a purpose, though it often is very unclear what it is to begin with. And sometimes it has to go through this like messy, people's feelings get hurt, we have to have long conversations about it. It like, then it all comes back to like, oh, okay, we're all back on track now. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, the balance of authenticity and harmony is
Yes. Yeah.
so difficult.
It's so beautiful.
yeah, I mean, I think in part what makes it difficult, and it's funny too, because we started talking about my writing, and I'm split, because it's like part of me wants to just have like let a conversation with you guys, and then part of me is like, will people watching this be confused because they don't know what I write about? So maybe we'll end up circling back to that, but for now I want to just address kind of what's on the what actually feels live in the conversation, which is what you just said, the harmony and the authenticity thing. And I think part of why it's difficult is because of like misunderstandings of what both of those words mean. So it's like harmony is not a static bliss state. But a lot of people think that's what it is. And authenticity is not saying the first thing that comes into your head at all times. So what it's like, once you're actually have an embodied understanding of both authenticity and harmony, they're really synchronized with each other, because I mean, I've uh last year I was in this group called, I forget what it was called, but it was a radical aliveness group. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with radical aliveness. It's very similar to authentic relating and T group and all of those sort of like being present and being real in humaning and all of that together. And what the what the facilitator of the group was kind of trying to encourage us to do was to be with these really challenging topics. Usually they had something to do with like ideologies or social problem, like social ills and racism and all of these like identity politics, all of these themes. But rather than like playing within those structures, we were dancing with them on like a deeper level of like what's actually here for me about this topic. What am I actually feeling? What am I reliving? Like what is the relational dynamic that I get pulled into habitually when this topic arises, and how do I choose differently, right? Because the actual authentic thing wasn't to just agree, right, that someone was right and the other people were wrong, nor was it to fight each other and like debate, right, and figure out what is the like go to war with each other. It's not about that either. It's more about self discovery and group process and actually finding the real thing, which is it lies in the realm of the unknown. And to me, I mean, in my daily prayer practice, which is now ramped up to like twice a day, which is very funny, and intense and awesome. Um, there's in the morning, there's always a moment of tension and conflict and not wanting to do it, right? Because there's something there that I'm just like really not looking forward to feeling or seeing about myself. Because the first part is inspired by confession, which I don't do confession, but what I do is like contemplation, self-reflection, shadow work, right? First thing in the morning, because I'm a fucking insane person. um, and it's really hard. Sometimes it'll like I will dissociate without realizing it and trying to convince myself like this is not, I'm a good person or all this stuff, right? But actually dropping in with how do I actually feel about myself? How do I actually feel about that action that I did, regardless of whether it was right or wrong? Um, that's authentic, is that like inner conflict is actually the authenticity, and it is also the harmony, because that friction is creating connection, deeper connection of parts of myself. That was a little rambly, but I think you
No, this is
get what I
beautiful.
mean. Yeah. And this is often what I write about. It is like the tension between opposites as I often experience them within myself. And it ends up resonating for a lot of people somehow. It's really interesting. It's just like, really? It's like, you get it?
Yeah. It's interest that the dance of a duality is so I'd like the Hermeticists say the principle of polarity, I think, where it's like almost every dimension of your life you can find these really potent polarities that you move in between, and like being incarnate beings, we just find ourselves always drawn between in these pairs of opposites, and it's like man, it's such an interesting format to start thinking in, because the first layer, like with authenticity and harmony, the first layer is like, okay, I'm either one or the other. That's kind of the first way to approach it. And then kind of like you were talking about, well, exactly like you were talking about, there's actually these things actually deeply need each other, and you actually can't resonate on the highest levels of harmony if you're not fully owning your own being. Like if you're not fully authentic, you can't fully harmonize. And so there's this way they really need each other to reach the highest registers. And yeah, and that, I mean, I imagine I have this belief for some reason that that's true in all of these opposing, like these little dualities we find, where the secret art is always that the opposites are actually, they need each other, and we, I don't know, somehow spiral upward
Yeah.
through their relation.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I mean, so many sacred texts actually speak to this in one way or another. I mean, the Tao is all about that, the tension between and the dance between the opposites, and the ultimate illusion that they're separate. And
Mhm.
the illusion, what I love about it is that the illusion is not necessarily dismissed. It's spoken for what it is, and it is, in a lot of ways, it's actually honored. It's seen as like a beautiful, like it's sort of like you go to the movies, right? And it's an illusion, right? The narrative that you're watching unfold, unless it's a documentary, is actually not happening. But it is also totally exactly happening, right? And it teaches you something about yourself that is actually real.
Mm.
And so and this is true in Hermeticism. I'm realizing too that this is very present in Christianity, although it is not always really obvious. It's more obvious in the more mystical branches of it, but it's less obvious in the more um, exoteric, which it was most common, is what I found. In the more exoteric Christian ways are not as, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, all of the mysteries seem to be about unification, theosis, right? Like feeling separate from the divine other, and like constantly having to yoke yourself to it because there is a force in reality, right? Which is funny because in science you have entropy and you have negative entropy. It's like the force that tears things apart and the force that works to pull them back together. And I like to think of prayer or ritual as a negative entropic process, where it's like we are constantly being torn away from our divine other, and feeling constantly being made to feel separate from them, either through our own actions or through some form of, I don't know, some interference, right? And we have to work to bridge that gap. And the whole point of living is the process of bridging that gap. Um, but yeah, it is sort of at the core of mysticism, and also of love. Is,
Yeah.
I feel separate, I want to conjoin. Like the only way you could conjoin is if there is a space between. Um, so how do we kind of honor that space between?
Right. Yeah, it's
Otherwise, we
like
become like enmeshed, right?
right. Like the pleasure and joy of running into the arms of the other can only be experienced if there's space. Yeah,
Right.
you need space to run.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the mystery. That's such the mystery of like existence, is that you actually have to the separation, it's like duality and unity are required. I don't know why I use that word. They appear to be, that's what I can see. If I really close my eyes and just really focus, um that's what it feels like, this respiration between like the
Mm.
constricting separation and then the relaxing like convergence of things. And that feels right and really fundamental. Feels that way.
Yeah, that was like the felt experience that we had in ceremony earlier in the summer, at least for me, of the cosmic orgasm. Like it was like the constriction and then the release, and that you couldn't feel that connective like peace in the release without that tightening first. It's like you said, respiration. And that just like that automatic process that my body was going through um taught me so much about the nature of the universe. It's crazy. Like without thought,
Mhm.
without, like any intellectual, like anything, just that alone was like, this is what it is. I don't know.
Mm. That is like a really, really juicy reflection. And I think it in part has to do with how simple it is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And something I like about linking it to orgasm too is that um it shows how this pattern is written into our bodies, like what our bodies naturally do and seek out, and then like these patterns, it's written in us. And then it's also, orgasm is the gateway to creating human life, so there's like, that's obviously a really important mystery, how
Mm.
this works. So there's this way that
Mm.
it feel, that feeling you get when you watch time lapse videos of like flowers opening up, and you just think, are like, wow, life is just happens. And that's to me, when I think about the cosmic orgasm, it's like, oh yeah, we're just happening, we're like,
We're just saying yes over and
right,
over. It's just yes
right,
everywhere.
we're the fungus spreading out and stuff. Oh.
Yeah. I've been very no lately, so it's funny that you guys
Mm.
are kind of going in this direction.
This tension between opposites. It lays the foundation for the conversation to come, where we dive not into the yes, but into the no. What things does the holy no keep open for us? Not just what does it, cut out from our lives, but what can fill the space that it holds. Thinking in particular during this Advent season, having a practice that just lasts a few weeks or even a few months or a few years can really emphasize holding open really incredible spaces for us. What do spiritual containers like this really get us though? In particular, chastity. Like if we open up that space for 2 years, how much more of the divine other can we welcome into our lives?
I'm okay. So it's like, so I've been celibate for a year and a few months, and it's really fun. It's like this thing will happen where actually my housemate was talking about it last night, of like, oh, it's really funny to watch men interact with me. Um in a town that's very like sex positive, and there's a lot of play parties, and like the erotic energy is not only really powerful here, it's really uncontained, and it's really interesting and also rare to move through it in the way that I move through it. And I'm trying to move with it instead of moving against it. I mean, my first year here was very much moving against it, very much feeling like withdrawn or collapsed or even threatened by it, and not necessarily wanting to make it bad, but really genuinely experiencing it as an assault on my nervous system, which has become very sensitive to erotic energies due to the celibacy, um, the commitment to that. And the second year, I mean, probably going to do another year. I think that's what's being asked of me. But the second year is like I'm learning to alchemize it as it comes towards me. Uh, like not necessarily saying yes to the desire, but saying yes to something else. Um, if that makes sense. Of like, yes, there's desire moving towards me, and I am saying yes to something else. So as opposed to it being, no, I don't want that. It's very different. It's very interesting. Um, it's more of an invitation to, okay, what is this connection actually asking for then?
Mm.
If not like some sort of sexual or erotic um, experience, like what do we do with that energy instead, right? And so it's a new way of setting boundaries that's very juicy and magical and interesting, um, and rare, I would say. I don't know many people who are, I know people, but I don't know many people here where I live that that's how they operate.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed like I've been reading a lot of Lives of the Saints,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
like a lot of like reading about like Catherine of Siena.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, who could levitate? That's a pretty
Hmm.
saintly. That's when you know it's hitting. You know,
Yeah. Well, she only weighed like half a pound.
right? That helps.
So, because she like never ate. So
Yeah,
she was
but
made of air.
it's so interesting that it be a lot of times it begins with a commitment to celibacy. There's
Hmm.
a way that yeah, there's a way that celibacy kind of like reserves that well of energy and polarity and magnetism. It like creates this incredible arsenal of power that you can use
Hmm.
to contact divine or to, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess you might have a better like firsthand view of this. Like what is that, how does it play a part in your spiritual practice to have that contained in such a way?
Mm. Oh, it's interesting. Well, so I my upbringing was very ascetic. My parents were not religious, but they were fasters. They, renounced a lot of things, sugar, meat, like they were very restrictive. And this was actually really unhealthy for me growing up because I now realize it wasn't the ascetic practices that were toxic. The ascetic practices are actually medicinal when they're held in a particular context, right? Or they're done for pious reasons. But they weren't done for pious reasons. They were done for shame reasons, right? They were done for moralizing reasons. And it's interesting now to come back into ascetic practice from a place of wanting to have more of my divine other as opposed to having less of something that I think is bad, right?
Mm.
It's almost like through creating a limitation, it's like you have a baby, right? And you need to hold the baby and you need to hold it close to you. Because what happens if you don't? The baby could get hurt, the baby could get sick, the baby doesn't develop a healthy attachment system, right? So the baby needs to be contained until it can, you know, um, what babies do is they sort of internalize the ways in which they are contained, and then they're able to contain themselves when they come to maturity. And it's very much similar in how I'm practicing it now. Is that the container is a protective? It's like a cell wall. It's like if I don't have this healthy boundary with myself or with other people, either through, what is it I'm putting into my body, who am I allowing to touch my body, right? Because in particular with the celibacy thing, it came through when I realized that I was yoking myself physically to people before I was really um aware of the contents of their soma, right? And so we co-regulate all the time. It doesn't matter, and the more we're with someone, the more we co-regulate, the more we become like them. And so who do I want to become like? I want to become like a virtuous person. And so I want to be surrounded by virtuous people. I want to be touched by virtuous people, by safe people, by people who choose to live in integrity. And nobody's perfect, obviously, but placing the limit of on my own actions is inviting energies into my field. Forgive the like vague. But this is how it feels like in a metaphorical sense. It feels like I am doing some sort of like magnetic magic, right? In my relational world, where the people who want to take from me will be offended or bewildered or take it personally, right? That I don't want to have sex. But the people who want to be in a reciprocal energy with me, and there's a shared sense of values, there's a shared sense that it's generative, right? Those people are the people that I want to have more of, to become like, and I open to. And so yeah, it kind of goes back to this, like, what am I saying yes to? I'm not saying yes to everything per se. I'm saying yes to everything in the Kalima sense of the word, where like, because everything exists, like everything exists, I can't deny, the dark and light of reality, but I do get to have some sort of agency over what I prioritize and where my attention goes in my daily life, and putting limits on what I allow in is really helpful for that. It's freaking hard. Sometimes I'm just like, ah. Like earlier when I was like, sometimes I'm just like, but it's, no one said that this is going to be 100% pleasure all the time. That's not real. That's a false promise. So
I'm just like mesmerized by you right now. I'm like, God, Scout.
it's
I'm
the
just
celibacy
like,
magic.
how do I know this human being and get to talk to them? It's like, that just
Uh-oh.
was so well spoken. I was on that journey with you. I'm like, God, yes, yes, yes to the no, and the reasons. And oh man, yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us and with everyone that will listen.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I also have this. I'm like wanting to go back to somewhere that we were earlier in the conversation around prayer and ritual. Feels like a diversion or like a different direction to go, but I think, yeah, it's a question that's been on my mind for you since Helene came through, and um that I feel like I read some things that you had written about, like the natural ways that ritual emerges in crisis, like in a crisis or something. Is that,
Oh yeah.
am I remembering?
Yeah.
I'm one.
Crisis as ritual ordeal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um I guess, like, yeah, I'm wondering if we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Sure, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess when we met with you in Nashville, the idea was, we thought, oh, like, let's talk about how to create a ritual. And then when I saw that, like, that you were reflecting on the crisis with a lens of, with ritual as like a lens, I was like, wow, that's even like almost more interesting than how do we create a ritual. It's like, how did the rituals like create itself in our
Hmm.
world. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, and then maybe we fold that into kind of a conversation about how to intentionally create a ritual, or set
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I used to refer to myself as an emergent ritual artist. That's still true, but part of the call of coming here to Asheville, clearly, based on what I've learned and what I've been exposed to. So I followed the guidance of spirit here to move here. Um, in September was when I think they told me that I would be moving here. And it was because of the sort of, there's like a ritual art scene here. And I had been calling myself an emergent ritual artist, but I had been a solar practitioner for however long. And that's sort of what you're speaking to about how the ritual reveals itself, how it moves through the self. And this stuff, I have a very like academic sort of perspective on. And so the emergent ritual happens because we are ritual beings. It's like embedded into our cognition. It's hardwired into us. It's like an evolutionarily adaptive behavior, right? And what it does is a couple of things, depending on who you ask. And I follow a number of scholars on this. On the cultural, social level, it yokes us to each other. It creates a sort of co-regulatory, shared sense of reality, shared sense of values, shared experience. Ordeal is really, really important for this, and I'll come back to that in a second. On the sort of more cognitive and psychological levels, it sort of resets our pattern recognition. So, as you know, the election just passed, and people are fighting about it. And people are fighting about it not because one side is moral and the other side is immoral. We all know that the whole fucking thing's immoral, but there's disagreement as to who is more immoral than the other person or whatever, that's actually totally valid, because based on your lived experience, one person is going to be more threatening than you. So I'll put that there. But a lot of the reason why people are fighting is because their pattern recognition and their nervous systems, their amygdala, it's all hijacked, right, by the circumstances. And so ritual actually allows us to mitigate that, because it's a normal thing that happens to us. We look at patterns and then we create meaning around them. And sometimes that meaning is really, really not useful. And sometimes it is. And consistent ritual allows you to have more discernment around them. So there's that. So there's all these different reasons why, we perform ritual actions unconsciously every day, all the time, whether we like it or not. And then there's container for ritual, right? Which is like the traditional ritual, which has a mythology tied to it, and a community associated with it and all of that. And coming to Asheville has kind of like really married these two parts of me together. The part of me that wants traditional container, that has a mythos, that has all of that, right? And then the emergent, more behavioral side of ritual, where it's just like the most normal human thing in the world. With ordeal in particular, it's interesting when a ritual ordeal happens emergently, because it's probably more likely that that's going to become traumatic, because there's no container. Whereas a ritual ordeal that is held by a tradition is like, you come of age, you do the same ritual that your older brother did when he came of age, right? And you might not survive it, especially if, traditionally speaking, especially if you're male, you might not survive it, because, but it is what creates you. You are no longer the child you were. That person is dead. You are now this in the eyes of the community. The community gives you who you are, right? And that is that being able to be contextualized in that way is what I believe, based on just what I've read, and also how I feel, is what allows the traditional cultures to do things that seem really unhinged without something like trauma being as much of an issue. It's not that trauma is not an issue in traditional cultures, but it's like Western postmodernity really centers it and really hones in on it. And we're like, what are we going to do about all these broken people? Ritual. And so with the ritual ordeal of Helene, I'm getting long-winded here. So I'm gonna end it here. But the ritual ordeal of Helene was emergent. We didn't see it coming. There was a lot of loss. A lot of people are their pattern recognition systems are totally hijacked, and they have narratives that about why it happened and who caused it and what caused it and all of that, that certain members of the community are really like, there's tension there. A lot of that I would argue is because we're relying in this community largely on emergent rituals that are spontaneous. It's not everyone, but a lot of the practitioners in this community are like ritual design folks that like they base their stuff on traditions, but they aren't necessarily devoted to a tradition. Like they weren't born into a lineage or whatever. And that's not a bad thing. It's just the way that we contextualize of a ritual ordeal in that context is very different. It's a lot riskier. So I'm kind of now learning, how do I really root in the way that a person in a traditional culture would have? How do I find spiritual leaders? Because a lot of it is like we're not held by elders very much. Or like the elders are olders. They're not, there's not like a council of elders that is like, what does the scripture say and all of that.
Yeah.
It's not that that's the perfect solution, because there's a lot of abuse that can happen when that's, when all of the power is placed on those people. But it's very different. It's very interesting. And yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
That was an incredible riff. I'm rocking and rolling over here.
Yeah, I and that was like I had this thought like, okay, I suspected that your answer was going to take me on this like little ride, and it did. And now I'm left with this like, but what do we do? What's the solution? how do we fix it? Where's it?
Emergent ritual. Anyone who spends a lot of time circling or doing transformational connection and a lot of these other relational arts will have no problem recognizing exactly what Scout is talking about here. And when we go to the group level and think about something like the hurricane as a collective ordeal, like a collective initiation ritual, we begin to see it less as something that humans do and more a force in life, something that articulates matter itself and incarnation. It's almost like ritual is this wavelength of being that humans tune into. And we're able to create containers to more reliably do that. Think about the rituals in our lives, weddings, funerals. Those are the big ones, but there's a lot of little ones too. It's this phenomenon that orders existence, especially for us creatures who are here to worship the divine and steward the land. The question then becomes, how do we better harness and honor this capacity in humans to tap into the ritual layer of existence? And how do we integrate it more deeply into our real lives right now?
Like, what are leaders now when we're in this kind of new paradigm of, especially with what, like, rooted in what you're just talking about just now, like trying to find this traditional ritual grounding, because seeing like the way that not having that tether can look, but then going and kind of coming up short of like, where is it though? And what is it though? How do we, that's like that feels like a really tangible problem to solve in a way. I don't know. But also like a very challenging paradox. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if it's just you just take an old institution like the Catholic Church, then add in shadow work as like you have to go through tons of that all the time, and then add in like circling and psychedelics, and then boom,
You're done. So
solved
easy.
Western civilization for you right there.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, that's what the mystery of confession is supposed to be.
Mm.
And this is why I'm like, my shadow work is very inspired by confession. You know, it's like the reason why I don't feel comfortable doing it in the context of a church is because they get to decide what a sin is. And they have like particular behaviors, and specifically the Catholic Church, like there are particular behaviors and lifestyles that are deemed sinful. And I don't necessarily feel like 100% that's fair of them. But what I do think is really medicinal about it is like you have a sacred covenant with a divine other. And when certain thoughts, emotions, or actions break that covenant or disrupt it in some way, and they're all what they have to do with the ego. They have to do with the inflation of the ego. I want to feel good, so I'm going to do these pleasure-seeking behaviors because my ego wants to feel good, right? Or my body wants to feel good, and temporarily in this moment. And these are things that pull us away from the whole, right? The holistic self is more than the body, it's more than the mind, it's more than the ego, it's all of them, right? So what I think, I don't know where the church went wrong with this, but I was reading about the origin of confession, and it is a group accountability practice. The early members, this is how the church was formed. The early Christians were just kind of like wandering weirdos. They were like the yogis. They just like went off in the caves to meditate all day, right? And eventually they kind of wandered into each other, and they would come together and they would perform confession as a community. And kind of say like, oh, I've done this to offend God, like I've done that to offend God, and help each other heal and come back into union with God, like bridge, return to the covenant, so to speak, right? And it's like if you marry someone and you're like, we're in an open relationship and here are the boundaries, right? A lot of people, this is like one of the weird things about open relationships is like there are still boundaries, but because the boundaries are like murkier, you can sometimes more easily offend that covenant. But the point is to come back into the agreement, into the contract, and what do you do if you offend your partner? You apologize. You apologize and you change your behavior. So it's like it was meant to be, I feel like, a collective form of shadow work, and then the church grew, and then priests became involved, and it was meant to be a way to protect people. But I do think something was lost when they changed the format of confession from a community coming together to hold each other accountable to their covenant that they promised themselves to just a person confessing before God, and a priest is there to just make sure that they're doing it right. Right? There's something like feels like there's something was lost there. So yeah, it's not a criticism per se. It's just there's a mournfulness, and I kind of long for a community accountability practice like that.
Yeah, I'm appreciating.
Yeah.
There's like it's like a version of like a struggle session, like a opt-in
I don't know what
struggle
that is.
session. Oh, that's something on on like the radical left. There are really abusive versions of that where like during the Cultural Revolution, people would be kind of publicly humiliated and but there's like positive versions of that where people, are trying to become the best revolutionaries they can, like be most aligned with the revolution. Um, which is in the end probably just millenarian Christianity, and probably in the end. But
I find myself trying to think of like a process or a game or a activity that could be that.
yeah.
There are some, but um some of but it's extremely dangerous in a way. Like there's a lot of when I say dangerous, like there needs to be a lot of caution taken. There's a lot of accidental ways that can go in another direction, even with like an activity as simple as withholds, which we've done in our community before, where you express in community like a withhold that you have for a specific person in the group to them, and you ask if they will are willing to take it, and then you say yes or no. You don't know what it's going to be, so you're like, yes, I will accept your withhold. I think like
Yeah.
but it ends up having these unintended long lasting consequences. So there's God, it would be so beautiful if there was a regular practice of collective shadow work like that.
Yeah.
I want that desperately.
I
Want
I
that.
like, oops,
I
you go
have
ahead.
I have kind of like an edgy question. I want to go into a little bit of edgy territory around something you said about like because um I guess it kind of has to do with the grounding of a tradition and the way that like an issue with confession is that there's not necessarily fully shared values with the people granting confession around what is a sin and what isn't. So it like doesn't actually, it's not necessarily a good technology to keep you aligned and in integrity with your covenant. But then I wonder like um part of embedding in a tradition, I imagine requires submitting to the tradition. And that like in the parts where we don't align, there's a path into the tradition is to um configure yourself towards it rather than being like, oh well, I where we disagree, I err on the side of me. That's kind of how I do it. I like where I disagree with the doctrine of the Catholic Church, I take my side every time. And I wonder sometimes like, am I actually missing out really profoundly on what this relationship actually could be, where I actually submit and I give authority to and I pick it doesn't have to be the Catholic Church, but maybe I need to pick a tradition that I can fully submit to all the way and um you know like is that what is missing, that we're not capable, we are subjects who are not capable of submission, and that makes it like impossible to actually get the full benefit of tradition because we want like we have this like consumer need to like have it perfectly match our like our
Mm,
preferences, and it's like
mhm.
yeah.
I have so much that I could say about this.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, so much. I mean, I was listening to a priest talk about this, and he effectively boiled it down to not all of us like, I forget what his name was, but he grew up Protestant and then he converted to Orthodoxy in his 20s or his 30s or something. Because he was an atheist as a teenager and into his 20s, and then he converted to Orthodoxy. And his father converted alongside him. Um, and he was like, it's not about uh, the value is of selfless love. So there's a lot of um, sacrificial, like there's something sacrificial about it, because the idea is that there's something sacrificial about love, at least in this particular tradition. And I would go so far as to say love in general, there is always something sacrificial about unconditional love, which is why I'm going to write a post called Unconditional Love is Dangerous. And it is going to be about how we um idolize and we idolize unconditional love. Unconditional love is dangerous because what it is asking of you is to empty the fuck out of yourself, sometimes to your own detriment in a lot of ways, but like for the journey, right? Like do it for the vine. You know what I mean? It's not, it's going to wreck you. It's going to destroy you. It's going to break your heart. Unconditional love, right? What is the most unconditionally loving relationship? If you have a healthy bond with your mother, if the mother, the mother raises the child, not because like the mother necessarily gets to like decide what the, and a lot of mothers do make these mistakes, and that's a part of the journey of motherhood, is like you don't get to decide how that child's life goes. You don't get to decide what their values are. You don't get to decide what they think. You don't get to decide how long they live. You just get to decide. You sacrifice everything to give to them, and you hope for the best. That's like the edgiest thing. It's the most unconditionally loving relationship. And so like the traditional relationship with the divine other is very like this. It's very like, I am going to give everything to you whether I get something back or not. That's really scary. You don't need to be in the context of a tradition to do that. You just need to have boundaries, right? Because unconditional love is dangerous. It's even dangerous in the context of a tradition, because there's abuse within the church. The Catholic Church is infamous for this, right? We don't hear that much about the, abuse in the Orthodox Church because nobody even knows about it. Nobody cares about the Orthodox Christians. There's, also Orthodox Jews and Reformed Jews, and there's, Muslims, and there's all the the Abrahamic religions, the biggest religions in the world. Besides, I think the other, the runners-up are Buddhism and Hinduism. I think those are the most popular religions, right? All of them have a lot like this quality of self-emptying and devotion and transcending duality, which is dangerous outside of the context of a container with rules, with teachers, with, and you can create your own rules, but that's riskier in a lot of ways. It's not more or less risky, I would argue, than devoting yourself to a teacher and risking, that being in that vulnerable state and then being abused. Every single relationship carries that risk. Every single relationship carries that risk. Why would our relationship with divine other be any different?
Like a foundational principle I'm really resonating with your perspective there is how relational it's a relationship we have, and as someone who studies and upholds and really takes as the center of my spiritual practice the relational arts, there's like a way that I really sense a lot of there's just like a lot of help and mercy in hearing you say that, like, oh yeah, this is, I navigate this. The divine is a little bit different than another human being, but it is a relationship, and it is and like there's an art to that, and I actually can practice that art with things like circling, but also there's always like uh dropping into that relational level with the sacred feels workable to me in a way that maybe other frameworks feel less workable. That's really, yeah, that was really good to hear.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'm also, I think, feeling some sort of sense of like wanting a turn to uh I it's funny, but like I want to hear prescriptions from you, like or like from your vantage point.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, I mean, I want to context this correctly. Like I want to get your perspective and see like what kind of clarity or what kind of shot do you feel like you have on getting to some kind of grounding for yourself in tradition, or and yeah, and like tradition as a way, as like a meta container for rituals and, I don't know, experience and existence, I guess.
Yeah, well, I am definitely in a courtship with orthodoxy, which is challenging to my more progressive there's a progressive way to love, which is genuinely accepting of all ways of being as equally beautiful, important, and right ways of being. And I still really hold on to those values. And then there are some values of orthodoxy that feel really important for my personal life to implement, such as like certain restrictions on certain behaviors. There's like a I'm dancing with it in a way where I'm like, how can I implement this without becoming rigid or without betraying a certain part of myself that is also true, also authentic, which is to genuinely love everyone. And when I say love everyone, I don't mean like pat them on the head and like, oh, poor you, you don't know the right God, but I still love you. It's more like the way in which you show up to life is sacred, even if and I'm really savage with this too. I'm like, there are people that have hurt me and abused me in my past. Trigger warning. But I'm just like, your decision to treat me that way or to treat another human being that way, also a part of the grand sacred. It wouldn't exist otherwise. My belief is that the divine other allows for us to flirt with various degrees of what you might call evil or wrong, right? Again, it's part of that dance of like, will you return to me? Will you are you devoted to me? You're not devoted to someone that you're forced. That's actually abusive, right? If the divine other is saying, you have no choice, I am not going to let you decide whether or not you're going to commit to me or love me. I am going to just make you unable to not love me. That's not loving. You're just a robot. Also, that's no fun. Right. And so we have, evil exists because we're so, and this is, my understanding of Kali Ma is that she is so full of love. She's so full of pure desire that she can be a savage monster. Because she's protecting her children. So she can actually go to that level of severity out of love. Right. And so when I think about these traditions and like how do I ground this within myself? I think, where can I go where I can accept the tradition and implement the tradition in my own life that doesn't have me sacrifice my more progressive values or the more individual ways in which I believe love exists. And, it depends. Some churches allow for that, some don't. I would like to find a religious community centered in an ancient practice, in an ancient way. I actually recently joined an Irish Celtic mystery school, which is very influenced by the main teacher's Catholic upbringing, because Irish Christianity is very animistic, or at least, because of there was a more peaceful conversion at first. The Irish had, Christians around way before they were colonized a billion times. And there are places where what makes me sort of drawn to the Christian faith at the moment is actually how it sort of managed to take root and syncretize and actually merge with and incorporate older indigenous land-based wisdom into it before it was then co-opted and used as a way of controlling and dominating and actually destroying those ways. It actually merged with those ways. It helped preserve them, even when it was
I cannot
even when it was forcefully implemented. The indigenous people were smart enough to syncretize it themselves because it just naturally has that capacity. I mean, the mythology is so classic. The church itself even has, in some ways, I feel, strayed from its own truths. So it's very complicated, it's very messy, but it's also very sexy, and I'm really into it.
Yeah.
So that is where I'm leaning at the moment. But I also have this like weird, like polyamorous thing with Judaism.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, because there's more, how do I put this? The Jewish people are there's almost like it's like the ways beg to be challenged by their own people. It's sort of like the Jewish version of this god, or the Jewish god says, try to knock me over so you can see how firm I am. Whereas like the Christian relationship to God is believe in me even when you can't see me, or even when it seems like I've betrayed you, or I'm not, it's a little bit more like, ooh, like I'm there, but like it's very mysterious. Whereas like the Jewish God is like, do your worst, like try me, And I kind of like that. Like I'm like, I want to be able to like push up against and challenge and critique and even reject or reinterpret certain things. And the Jewish faith allows for that, and actually almost like actively, it's like part of being Jewish is doing that. It's really beautiful. And so there's a little bit of a leaning there to the we're not fully claimed yet, but we'll see what happens. But do I want a tradition? Absolutely. Do I want like a community of practice that I can actually explore theology with, and go out into the world and a cat. Sorry. Go out into the world and cat. I'm just looking for my cat.
What you say about the syncretizing of local, especially like local pagan spirits into the greater tradition, is, for me, was the thing that really clicked me over to like, oh, I have to learn everything I can about Catholicism, and I need to practice this. Like when I remember reading as like an occultist who didn't see himself as a Christian at all. You would, you might have had this experience too, like reading the histories of how, oh, Saint Bridget used to be this goddess Bridget, and like, and there's almost this smirking, like, as if the Catholic Church didn't know what it was getting itself into or something.
Right.
Yeah. But actually now I realize, like, well, I'm trying to recreate these traditions, and reconnect to these spirit entities of my ancestors. And then it's like, well, there's actually an uninterrupted tradition that continues. It's the saints in the Catholic Church, where the people who were worshiping Bridget continue to worship her uninterrupted as Saint Bridget. And so then that connection and cult of that local land goddess continued and is preserved, and joins this like this pantheon of local land gods that now expands the whole world. I mean, because the Catholic Church has gone everywhere. And then like I encourage anyone who does magic, especially who likes to work with deities, try working with saints. It's a lot easier. You should, it's so much easier, and you get the goods, and you just have to ask. That's all you
Right.
gotta do.
Because here's the thing too with like idolatry, right? Is that like I see idolatry as a force of fragmentation. It's not about you shouldn't worship this god or you shouldn't do that. It's as soon as you believe that that god is somehow separate from the whole, you have a problem, right? And so working with the saints and venerating the saints, there's a couple of reasons why venerating the saints has been a really healing practice for me. One of the main reasons is that veneration, right, is not necessarily worship, right? So you can work with the saint, but you don't put that saint above the whole, right? Because it's a part of a larger context. Another thing is that any deity is not also not the whole. It is a element of the whole. It is a particular personality trait of the whole, right? So like in the Irish Celtic Mystery School, what they did was we had like we did a Samhain ritual, and it was my first ritual with this group, and we walk around a stone circle, and I'm going to spare you the details of the mythology of the stone circle, but each stone represents a deity which is syncretized with the saint, one of the Irish saints, right? I think there are 12. The 12, yeah, it's like the 12 Irish apostles or something. And we walked around the stone circle and we found a chair, right, to sit in for the year. And so we're meant to work with and incorporate this old god, right? But he gives us the saint that they are syncretized with, in case we want to work with them as well, because in his understanding, the divine powers reveal themselves to us not as they are, but as we can receive them.
Ooh, yeah.
So there's that to consider, as well as that a deity is never separate from the whole, is a personality trait of the whole divine other, and doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you are aware of the first two things when you're working with that being, right? And so I love working with the saints because um that is how the divine other presents itself to me. First of all, I'm not trying to force it to be pagan because I think it's cooler, or there's more freedom involved, right? I'm like, a saint came to me. Saints have been coming to me since I was a little kid. So have fairies, like, right? And so have angels, all of that stuff. And so it's like, am I listening to the divine and how it kind of knows me better than I know myself? It knows that this is the way that it should speak to me. It knows that there's it's going to be most potent in this way. It's going to be most potent for some people working with, rather than, I ended up in the seat of Anya, who is love, fertility, and abundance, and as well as the fairy queen, or she's like a
Nice.
mysterious fairy queen, syncretized with Saint Ida. I think you pronounce it Ida. I don't think it's Ida, but we'll call her Saint Ida. And I was struggling to connect with Anya in some ways, but as soon as I figured out what saint she was syncretized with, it was like, and so I would say, yeah, try working with saints, but try working with the divine other's personality traits as they present themselves to you, is what I would say. But if you want to connect to more people in faith and in ritual, knowing what the saints are syncretized with, what deities they're syncretized with, is a great place to start, because it becomes a shared language. So yeah, I'm yes anding you right now, essentially. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
Thanks.
Wow, I wish we lived in Asheville right now in this
Yeah.
moment. In this moment, in some ways.
I mean, I can come visit you guys. I'm down for that.
Yes.
I'm willing. We can do all
Yeah.
We
sorts
have
of
an
fun
absolute place
rituals
to stay. We
together.
have plenty of room here at the house.
Oh, nice. Cool.
You are
cool.
more than welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would love to spend more time together, learning more, observing you all in ritual, and um, all of that, because I'm very curious about the way you hold. I want to experience the way that you hold container. It just speaking to you, I do feel the power and the potency of it, and I covet it.
Yeah, something we've been entering kind of a new generation, or a new season of facilitation, and something that we really wanted to get right this time and really nail down and really tighten up on is ritual creation of a container that will keep us energetically safe and held no matter what comes up. Why, and doing that in a way that um people from all walks of life can do and like feel like it's not it's not stepping on the toes of any faith they might come in with, or lack of faith, and like secular worldview, and then also that they will like keep a straight face doing, you know what I mean? There's like
Oof.
yeah, not
Yeah.
so easy.
Yeah, it's not
And
easy.
and
It's like,
that
yeah.
at the same time meets the like ritual requirements that we need to actually like keep the spirits that we want out, keep them out. Like it needs to also be effective. magic. So it's like to hit all three of those is like an interesting challenge. You know, it's really and it reminds me of that. Slavoj Žižek tells this joke all the time about there's this astrophysicist who has this cabin, and he invites all of his scientist friends there, and he has a horseshoe over the door, and they're like, why do you have that? And he goes, well, it's for good luck. And all of his scientist friends are like, you don't believe in that, do you? And then the astrophysicist says, well, I'm told that it works even if you don't believe in it. And that's kind of the rituals we're trying to use are like they work even if you don't believe in it. And that's like
like we can set I think that we do our best to set all of the things that we have the power to set, and then it just becomes this like it's like it's something that doesn't have really well, there probably are words that could describe it, but it's like it becomes like a pose, or like an energetic pose that just like again, not words for me at least to describe it, like being able to reverse engineer, like when it really hits, like when we've had, especially in this space, in this room, um are where some of our deeper processes occur rather than like in a public space. um like reverse engineering, like what is it that made that so tight, like tight, I don't know if tight, like so powerful. And there's not, there's not one specific thing you can point to. It's like there's like a removing of like one's identity from the process. And I don't know. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I feel self-judgment.
I
Oh no.
I noticed that maybe like witness the collapse happen.
It just works, you guys. It just works sometimes. And sometimes it really doesn't, and that sucks too.
I'm having a moment of like remembering my friend Ronan came over yesterday, and we talked about this sort of like group process thing that he's wanting to start, having to do with like ideology, which I love that he's doing. But I came to him with like some concerns, and I just started venting my ass off a little bit because I was like, I have this fear, I have this projection that it's just going to be a bunch of guys throwing intellectual spears at each other for getting to feel their feelings. And I'm going to be the one who's like, what about your feelings? And no one's going to want to listen to me. And I don't know, it kind of felt like what you were sharing was like a lot of that. It's almost like you were trying to say something similar, but then the pattern happened inside of you where you're just like, it's not making sense, so I'm just going to shut up.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't need to make sense. It's fine. You can speak from feeling.
Yes. I often do, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to be reminded that it's okay to speak from feeling, and there needs to be someone to remind people to speak from feeling. And I think you've been that for me the past couple of times that we've talked, and it's been wonderful. So definitely appreciating that about you.
Yeah, there's like, it's this, we have kind of named it. Well, I mean, it probably has a lot of names, but what we've been calling it is contact, which is like, what if it could speak? If that thing that is coming through you had words, what would the words say? And they don't have to make sense. Like, what is the how do you put words to the emotions that are like spilling through? It usually starts with "I want."
Yeah. I noticed what's funny about that layer, adding in that layer of like speaking what comes up, and so almost entering sort of a channel state of like, I don't know why this is coming up, but I'm just going to give life to it. It adds this whole nother like hygienic requirement of the space energetically to make sure that what is coming up through you is like, I don't know. You want to make the energy of the room really clean if you're going to be entering into that kind of intimacy with what arises. Spooky. Yeah. I guess I want to be respectful of your time. So, but before we go, I want to make sure that people know what you do, how they can get more content from you, and yeah, how do they get more Scout in their lives?
Well, if you want extra Scout, um, you can follow me on Substack. That's probably where my best content lives. And most of it is free, some of it is not. Uh, if you do a paid subscription, you get things like guided meditations and ritual practice suggestions. And if I do, sometimes I record conversations that I have with my friends. I'm very blessed to have a number of incredibly wise people in my social circle. And I want to share their wisdom with the world, but a lot of these people are a little bit more behind the scenes people. So I keep, I don't publicly share them, but you can have access to that stuff. But most of it's free. All of my writing is free. I also write friction. I write friction. It's true. I also write fiction on Substack. I write a lot on social media as well. These are more like excerpts from things. Yeah. And if you're local to Asheville, you can also hear about my events on Facebook. I'm going to start doing noetic prayer circles in the next month or two. So that will be more of an online offering. I do tons of online offerings, ritual practice, facilitation, one-to-one, all that good stuff. But that can all be found on social media or Substack. So Facebook, Instagram, that kind of thing. I can send you guys links to share with people if that's
Yes, please
best.
do. So if you're watching or listening to this, those links will be in the show notes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
The container is now closed. This Advent season is such a time of preparation, and part of preparing is really honing in our practice and really focusing on what's important. I think there's no better way to do that than to talk to people like Scout Rainer Wiley. If you would like more for content, and I can't imagine a world where you wouldn't want as much of her content as possible, go to the show notes and you can find her Substack. She has this incredible newsletter, Hyperphantasia, and it explores esoteric, mystical, and magical religious ideas in a really embedded in real life kind of way. Plus there's poetry and art and music. It's a sensory rich experience. It's Christmas time, and before I sign off here, the last time for the year, I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all the people who watch, who listen, who are on Patreon, who contribute to conversations in our Facebook group, who come to our events, and also all the people who have come onto the show this past year and shared their incredible wisdom. Just the generosity and the gratitude that feels like it hums out of every single atom in the universe is overwhelming at times. We are so incredibly grateful. And I can't wait to join you guys in 2025. Have a wonderful, happy holidays. And with that, we have a very nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.